Offered candles in prayer to your light. How much longer, friend, must I cry your name? I am yours, ever yours. Will you come? Lord, I've called you, my Lord. Long I've called you. Many years I have longed for your sight. Bathe the darkness with tears of devotion. Offered candles in prayer to your light. How much longer, friend, must I cry your name? I am yours, ever yours. Will you come? Lord Most High, our Heavenly Father, all our lives we dedicate to Thee. All our labors, all our joys and woes, all our pleasure, all our melody. Make us each a channel of Thy peace. When in darkness, guide us from above. Where there's sorrow, may we sow Thy joy. Where there's hatred, may we share Thy love. Lord Most High, our Heavenly Father, all our lives we dedicate to Thee. All our labors, all our joys and woes, all our pleasure, all our melody. Make us each a channel of Thy peace. When in darkness, guide us from above. Where there's sorrow, may we sow Thy joy. Where there's hatred, may we share Thy love.
Well, it really is very nice to be here with you all, sharing a topic that's dear to all of us at Ananda, and I think probably dear to everyone who's seeking happiness, whether they know it or not, which is how to work with using devotion to enhance and improve our practice of meditation. And what I'm going to talk about tonight is really, there's not a difference between the two, the way that our teacher, our guru, Paramhansa Yogananda, brought and taught meditation. And it's very, very unusual, the way that Yogananda taught meditation, because you usually see one or the other. Meditations and practices and technique, and things like affirmation and self-effort, all these things that are part of technique and practice. You usually see people on one end of that spectrum doing a lot of, breathing exercises and pranayamas and postures and all these things that are very, very helpful. Then you see the other side of the spectrum, which is people who depend entirely on divine grace, being born again and saved, and that's all we have to do, and God does the rest. And the way that Yogananda taught meditation, and the way that we teach it at Ananda, it merges those two together, and that both the two of them are not separate, and that they really enhance each other, and they eventually really are the same thing. Because for those of us who have been practicing meditation, Kriya Yoga for many years, our meditation is devotional, and our devotion is meditative. It's very inward. And so that's what I'm going to be touching upon tonight. What Yogananda, the way he taught, he's very misunderstood, and the whole path of Kriya Yoga is often misunderstood. I get a lot of phone calls and inquiries from people asking about Kriya Yoga, and very often people think it's just a technique. And you might get that idea from reading the Autobiography of a Yogi. This is a new edition with a beautiful new cover. You might get that impression from reading Autobiography of a Yogi because he mentions a technique of Kriya Yoga. But in fact, Yogananda also said that Kriya plus devotion works like mathematics. It cannot fail. And he wasn't talking about doing your practices and your disciplines and your meditation for a while and then kind of sitting over on the other side of the room and doing your devotional practices and offering yourself to God and burning incense and praying. No, he meant that the two are one and the same, and that when you work with both of them together, you get extraordinary results. And I have to say, I've seen extraordinary results over the years with people who practice meditation in this way. If you read the Autobiography of a Yogi, you really start to get the idea. If you read between the lines and look at the deeper teachings in it. I have a friend, I probably have said this here before, but I love it because this friend says that they read the Autobiography of a Yogi every few years. And they said that Yogananda does a miracle every time, which is that he puts new material in there that they know was not in there before. And I can see that a lot of us relate to that miracle, and we've seen the same miracle. The miracle is probably more that we're actually changed and transformed, and our intuition is developed through practices, and we're ready to receive more. But that idea of receiving is really integral to getting everything from meditation. Yogananda said that the spiritual path is 25% our effort, 25% the Guru's effort on our behalf, 50% the grace of God. And you can't get there just by picking yourself up by your own bootstraps. You can only go so far by using technique and self-effort and becoming really so pure that you just drink wheatgrass juice and you just breathe air and that's all. And you can do that, but it's not like you're going to ever become holier than thou from doing that. Really, you also have to depend on divine grace. And I think everyone who comes to any spiritual path has reached that point at some point in their lives where they just keep hitting their head against the wall. Their issues, their problems, their addictions, this, that, and the other thing, they just can't get any further. And that's really very often when people turn to God and to divine grace. And in the end, what the path of meditation and this formula that Yogananda gave, success with meditation, really, it's our best effort. It's not a perfect effort, and it's never going to be perfect until we really open ourselves completely to God. It's our best effort, essentially, to put ourselves in a position to be lifted up by divine grace. And this is where techniques and practices help us to calm our minds, to get still, and then when they're done with deepest devotion, with deep yearning for God and love for God, and the deepest receptivity, then God, divine grace, the Guru, whatever, they lift us up the rest of the way. And this is really, success on the spiritual path is really, very simply, it boils down to that. And I just recommend to people, look at this idea that Yogananda presented, this formula. And if you're ever bogging down spiritually, just check it out and see, okay, what's missing here? Is it my own self-effort? Because we do have to put out the effort. Or maybe I'm not receptive and I'm not practicing devotion and I'm not tuning into that help, which really is what's going to get me all the rest of the way there. And you'll find that when you follow the spiritual path with that sort of big picture view and really start applying these things, you'll find success spiritually. You'll find success in your meditation. You'll go deeper in meditation. You'll find experiences in meditation that you never thought were possible for you, with all our limitations, all our shortcomings, all these different things. And really, people often also come to the spiritual path to Kriya Yoga, and they think, oh, I'm unworthy for this, I'm have all these faults and problems, and I'm not good enough. And I think it's just part of our upbringing in the Western world. And, it's probably universal, but certainly it's part of Western Christianity of we're sinners and we just aren't good enough and this and that. And we just have to get over that. Yogananda said to demand your birthright as a child of God. And it's very striking to see how he would pray, because he wouldn't pray meek and mild, Yogananda, oh Lord, please help me, and with this deep humility. He would go before God, and he would very often worship and relate to God as the Divine Mother. And he would, as he said, I would scold Divine Mother every day. And I love hearing a prayer of his where he says, Beloved Lord, you created us against our will. Free us. That is our prayer. And he shouts it out. And I listen to that almost once a week. We have a Kriya meditation, and we listen to that. That's part of a talk. And that's how we should pray. We should demand it. In a way, I think Yogananda was really the founder of the whole Occupy movement. Because basically it's Occupy Heaven and Occupy God and Divine Mother. And he was telling people, listen, this is how we should all be. I had this crazy thought, which I mentioned a while ago, that what if everybody on the earth, we somehow convinced everybody to occupy heaven, and we all went up there and stormed the gates of heaven, and we all prayed like that and said, and Yogananda said he would scold Divine Mother lovingly. He always qualified it lovingly. But he would say, you created us against our will. We didn't ask to be created. Then you created this delusion that was so tricky that there's no way we could not get tricked into falling and stumbling in ignorance and making mistakes and earning bad karma and all these things. And then you expect us to get out, and it's almost like he's saying, what kind of mother are you to do this to your children? And he said, insist and demand it. And I thought, well, what if we all somehow got everyone in the world to do that? Everyone went to heaven and started yelling for child abuse or whatever way we could put it. Well, I think we've all seen that God doesn't come down necessarily and make everything right. And I've seen this in my own life. I was going through a chronic health problem that comes and goes, and makes life miserable occasionally for me, and very painful at times physically. And a friend was asking me, well, how has it been? And I'm saying, well, not very good. And she was saying, well, why would Divine Mother do this? It just doesn't seem right. And I responded. I said, well, I've had words with management about the conditions down here. Because, there's suffering everywhere. You just see it all over the world. And I've had words with management and told them what the issues were, and they don't seem to be fixing things yet. But in fact, what happens when we turn to God and find any way to turn to God, even if it's to get after God and yell at God for creating this thing and not getting us out, find any way to get to God, because you'll find that when God doesn't necessarily change the situation or change this world, by opening up to the divine, praying to God and being receptive, you find that you start changing. So if we all did occupy heaven, the whole world, somehow we could convince people to do that, you'll find that things wouldn't get fixed in some miraculous way, but you would find that people would change enough that all of a sudden the world would stop being so greedy and starting wars and taking food from people who hardly have any and all these things. And people would change. And that's what I have found in my own life when I'm going through problems that we all have to go through, health and karma and this and that. When I turn to God and pray and open myself up to divine grace, the problem doesn't necessarily go away, but the suffering inside, because what is suffering? Suffering and pain. Pain is simply, the physical aspect of it, and getting pricked with a pin. Suffering is when you start screaming and say, "Oh, this hurts, and I'm so miserable," and this and that. And there's a big difference. And you'll find that the grace of God, when it comes to you in that way, it really starts to alleviate the suffering, and you stop. And there's a spiritual law behind this, because we stop identifying with this little self, with all these little pinpricks, affecting our body. We start identifying and becoming one with God. And our consciousness is expanded, our little identification starts to dissolve, and so we become less identified with this physical suffering or mental suffering or whatever it is. And so that's how we're healed by divine grace. But in meditation especially, you'll find that there's a struggle with sitting there and you have restless thoughts. Does anyone else ever have that problem here? And you just ask, well, how do I get out of this? How do I solve this problem? And we have techniques, and this is the beauty of what Yogananda brought, is that it's a science. He brought scientific techniques that help us to calm our mind, and at least get us to a point where we're able to start making some progress. But he also taught us this whole idea of devotion, self-offering, and receptivity and attunement to divine grace. And when we combine those two really powerfully, both of them strongly, doing our darned best to practice these scientific techniques, but also doing it with a prayer and receptivity and devotion, you'll find that your meditation really becomes markedly different to the extent that you're able to do that. And over time, it's not always instant. It's not like necessarily, although you could go home tonight and do this and have the deepest meditation of your life, but you'll find that over time, prayer and meditation working together as one, that what happens is your heart starts becoming calm because you start becoming less agitated, your hurts are healed, your karma starts to be alleviated, and you're able to start meditating more and more deeply and feeling God's presence more and more. Because essentially, really, again, meditation and devotion and God, they're not able to be separated. One time, there's autobiography of a yogi, Yogananda had this experience where he was talking to the saint, the levitating saint. And this levitating saint would levitate, sit on his bed and rise up above his bed and sit up there for long, long periods of time. And he was a great yogi and a great meditator. And he meditated one time with Yogananda for about an hour. And when they finished meditating, Yogananda said, "The saint and I entered the meditative state. After an hour, his gentle voice roused me. You go often into the silence, but have you developed anubhava? Anubhava is the direct perception of God. He was reminding me to love God more than meditation. Do not mistake the technique for the goal," he said. And remember that meditation, the techniques and the practices are essentially a vehicle to take us to the goal. That's all they are. And when you've reached the goal, get out of the vehicle. An analogy I often use is that the automobile was originally invented as a vehicle to get us from point A to point B. And nowadays it's got a bar and a TV and huge stereo system and all kinds of fancy stuff. And it would be a little bit like getting in the car to go to the ocean, and you see people do this, going into the parking lot and just sitting in the parking lot with the stereo cranked up and the air conditioning on and never going into the ocean. And that's what it is for people who get overly caught up in techniques and pranayamas and all these techniques, thinking that they're going to just lift themselves up through the power of their holiness and purity. But the whole point is to get out of the vehicle and immerse yourself in the ocean of divine grace, of divine love, of devotion, all these things that we've been talking about. And so work with meditation as one united practice of love for God, of devotion, and spiritual science, and these spiritual principles. There is a spiritual science behind it. It's not just sort of vague philosophy or mysticism or, you have to... I saw this bumper sticker years ago that I just loved the audacity of the person just to be able to say it. And it was obviously a fundamentalist, which there's fundamentalists in every religion, so I'm picking on the fundamentalist Christian in this case, but there's fundamentalist Hindus and Muslims and everything, but the bumper sticker said, "God said it, I believe it, that settles it." They were very, very clear. And the science of yoga, you're not being asked to just believe it because God said it and that settles it, and not ever try it, question it, ask about it, wonder about it when it doesn't work. When it doesn't work, go talk to someone. Go talk to Haridas and Roma. Say, well, why isn't it working? Because these practices and these techniques are a spiritual science. They're based very simply on the science of yoga, explained most clearly by Patanjali, a great sage. And the whole path of Kriya Yoga is really based on this Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. And the fundamental principle of it, he defined yoga, which is union with God. It's nothing more or less than that. He said that yoga is the neutralizing of the waves of feeling in the heart. And it's very simply. And the waves of feeling in the heart are really what keeps us agitated, restless. And when the waves of emotion and feeling in the heart are agitated and restless, our minds are agitated and restless, our energy is going out into desire and attachment. And so the science of yoga, very, very simply, works with calming and stilling those waves of feeling in the heart. And this is what the techniques of Kriya Yoga, the beginning meditation techniques that they teach here regularly and in Los Angeles, these essentially are practices that start to calm those waves of feeling in the heart. But even devotional practices have the same effect, and this is why they work together. Why devotional chanting is a good example of an exercise, and essentially why devotional chanting takes us deep inside and makes us still and calm, eventually, if we do it in the right way, is it's taking this energy that's going down the astral spine, out through the heart center, into emotion and attachment and outwardness in a way, and it's taking that very same feeling energy and reversing it, turning it back in and offering it up to God. And by doing that, it starts to calm those waves of feeling. And again, you combine that with these scientific techniques that do the same thing. And I almost think that Yogananda would have said, rather than Kriya plus devotion works like a mathematics, or meditation plus devotion is what you could really say. But it's almost like Kriya times devotion. It's almost like they multiply each other because they enhance each other that much. And again, I have to say this from experience, many years of experience of practice, and watching many thousands of people learn these things and practice these things, that this is very, very effective. It actually does work. It's not just a promise. It's not something you have to take on faith. You'll see that this is why I recommend people to come to Ananda Village, and at least once in their life, just to see 250 people. There must be 100 of them who have been there 20, 30, 40 years doing these things. And you look at them and you just see that something is really, really working in their life. And I can tell you from having been there many years ago, and Haridas and Roma could say the same thing, that all these people didn't come that way. They didn't come fully baked and finished. You should have seen before Kriya and after Kriya. It's really remarkable. After 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, I've told this joke many times, and excuse me for those who have heard it so many times. But I've always thought that, we should take ads out in the back of magazines and put before Kriya Yoga and after Kriya Yoga and meditation in this path. Because you see all these diet ads and people look grumpy and heavy and they look so happy after eating this certain food for 30 days or whatever. But with Kriya Yoga, it's marked. It really is. But I only half jokingly tell that my before Kriya Yoga picture, the very last photo that was taken of me before I moved to Ananda Village, was taken by the California Department of Corrections. It was my mug shot that they took. And I wasn't a great evildoer, but obviously I wasn't a great yogi, lover of God either. But it's true. I still shake my head in amazement when I see Ananda Village and see beautiful retreat center and schools and businesses and markets and just this worldwide work. And seeing the very same people who arrived 35 years ago, I think, how are those people doing this? And how do they look like this? And it just, I scratch my head and I have to say it's a miracle. But it's the miracle of what I've just been talking about. When you practice these things, when you practice with devotion, when you open yourselves to divine grace, a miracle starts to happen in your own life, which is that God starts to change you. And again, to really, really simplify it, our part is so simple. Our effort is really simple, is to do the darned best that we can with meditation, with practices, but to do it with a sense of devotion and self-offering, and basically put ourselves in that position for God to change us. That's as simple as it gets, and that's really the power of it, is just as often as we can, putting ourselves at God's feet, however you want to relate to God and practice devotion, as the Divine Mother, as Christ, as Yogananda, offering yourself with devotion over and over and over again. And as over time, just inexorably, miraculously, and in very, very real ways, that power of divine grace, combined with our effort, starts to transform us and change us. And then meditation becomes much more than just a dry practice of techniques. It becomes the most beautiful worship of God that you could possibly imagine. And it can take some time. It can take 5, 10, 20, 30 years. But those who are sincere and work with it, put out that type of energy and spend time with others who are doing it to have that magnetism rub off on them, it does start to happen. I have to say, without exception, I see these changes in people who just put out the effort and try it. And it doesn't mean that it's easy. There's challenges for everybody. Our own karma, our own stuff. It's always big stuff for all of us that we've probably been trying to face and deal with for many lifetimes. But when we practice in those ways, those things start to get lifted from us and removed from us and lightened. Our burden gets lightened over time until we eventually become free of these little heavy burdens that we've been carrying around, baggage that we've been carrying around for many lifetimes. And then meditation becomes much, much more than just a technique or a practice. Again, Yogananda talked about different ways to work with devotion and try to get beyond this whole idea that it's just a technique and a science. There's a beautiful story of an Indian saint, Ram Prasad, and I'll tell 2 stories tonight about him and experiences that he had. He was a great lover of God as Divine Mother. And what's the beauty of these saints in Bengal, where Padma and Arnab are from, there's this tradition of just songs to Divine Mother. And they're so beautifully done, but there's a unique aspect to it, which is that people sing to God under all conditions, under all circumstances. And like Yogananda scolding Divine Mother every day, the way that he did, they do the same thing with their songs. They're songs of love for God in the most beautiful circumstances. But then there's a famine that comes and wipes out millions of people, and then the song is getting after Divine Mother and saying, how can your children are all crying. Can't you hear they're crying? They're hungering and they're crying. And you're not answering them. And you're just letting them die. And how can you let this happen? And again, it's said beautifully and lovingly. But if you find ways, and I'll talk more about this a little bit later, of continually bringing ourselves back to God under all circumstances, that starts to change us in very, very deep ways. And Ram Prasad, who was one of these singers who wrote many of these songs and poems, the story is, and this is a good story about your meditation practices, because some people get too caught up in the techniques. And I see this with Kriya Yoga. I talk to people regularly about their Kriya practice and how can they improve it and go deeper into it. And I see people who are too caught up in the techniques, and they think that if they just nail a perfect 10 with the technique, that's what's going to take them to God. And it's all about the techniques and just focusing on the physical part of it, or the breath, or the practical part of it. And the story of Ram Prasad is that he was always singing to Divine Mother, and a very devotional person. And one day he was on his way early in the morning to the Ganges River to do his morning rituals, mantras and things that part of his family and caste and probably tradition. And on the way there, he just ran across a very beautiful young woman who said, "Will you sing to me, please?" And he didn't know who she was, and he had to go do his duties and his rituals and his mantras and things. He said, "Well, when I come back and when I'm done with my rituals, I'll sing to you." And so he went and did his mantras and went in the river and worshipped the sun rising and all these things that were part of his duty. And as he was coming back, she wasn't there anymore. And then he thought, "Oh no, that was Divine Mother who was wanting me to sing to her. She came to me herself," and he started kicking himself. I had to get into my techniques and my practices and thought that was more important. And then he stopped and meditated and asked, "Well, was that you who appeared to me?" And he heard a voice, and it was the goddess. I said, "Yes, I am the goddess Annapurna, an aspect of Divine Mother. And you wouldn't sing to me, and you wouldn't stop and talk to me." And I was sorry about that. And so then she said, "I'm a goddess Annapurna from, I think, Varanasi is where she said she was." And so he immediately, I don't even know if he went home, he started walking the 3-day trek to Varanasi to go see her because she said she was there. And the very first night he camped on the Ganges by the river, and he had a fire, and he was chanting and singing to God, and she appeared to him again and said, "Why are you going to Varanasi? I'm everywhere. I'm omnipresent. You don't have to go anywhere to sing to me." And she was just teasing him and playing with him and having fun with him and teaching him, obviously, a lesson. Some good lessons. One is you don't have to go anywhere. Wherever you are, wherever God has put you, whatever circumstances you're in, you can pray, you can meditate, you can find God right then and there. There's no limitation. There's no constriction on that. And the other one is techniques are only a vehicle. When God appears, when we have devotion, which is when God appears, is when we have that deep devotion. Techniques, get out of the car, jump in the ocean, and immerse yourself in the ocean. So remember always that balance of technique and devotion. And again, for those who practice Kriya deeply over the years, they're not inseparable. Kriya, the technique even itself of Kriya, is just a purely devotional act and process of self-offering. And it's just a making love to God every time you breathe. And with every breath, I breathe. That's the beauty of that song I've always found, which is that every breath can be worship of God, whether it's in meditation, in activity, in helping others, in serving others, in seeing God in others. And you'll find that over time, when you practice your life that way, your meditation suddenly starts to become much, much more deep over time. There's something else I just want to touch on about how even scientifically these things work. It's not just a matter of faith. There's a physician at Ananda who teaches Kriya, and he's done a lot of studying of how the brain is affected by meditation. And he was actually a subject and was involved in one of the very first studies of how the brain is affected by meditation. And over the years, these studies have proven that meditation actually changes the brain and the way that the brain works, and it actually changes the physical structure of the brain. And so this is, again, the science of meditation. And this physician says that he has found in his own practice over the years that he was not a devotional person when he started meditation and Kriya Yoga. But as he started practicing it over time, it started changing his brain, the frontal lobes, and he can explain the science behind it, but actually started changing his brain, and he started naturally feeling more devotion. So again, these two enhance each other. I was on a plane flying not long ago on the way to teach meditation and do a Kriya initiation. And the person next to me had an article in the Wall Street Journal, of all newspapers, talking about meditation. And it was about how meditation can retrain the brain to subjugate and to reduce pain. And it was, again, a scientific study. And there was two things about this that were really, really interesting, which was that the study found two things that reduced pain by 30 to 40%, more effectively than anything else. And these were people with chronic pain. And one of them was learning meditation. These were people who didn't know any meditation. They taught it to them for the first time, just practicing some simple meditation. Their physical pain, or at least their experience of that pain, and they're getting caught in the suffering of that pain, was reduced by 30%. But there was something else that was also really fascinating, which they found was just as effective, which was that when the people brought in, they had the people bring in a picture of a loved one, as they put it, and when the people looked at that picture of the loved one, their pain or their experience of that pain also was reduced by more than 30%. And this is what we're talking about, is this balance of offering ourselves to God, praying to God, combining it with meditation. And God is this picture of this loved one, because I was wondering, well, what if you just had an argument with your loved one and you looked at a picture? Would it reduce pain or would it increase pain? But Divine Mother, God, the Guru, that's for the devotee, and for the meditator, that's our loved one. And just practicing that by itself, even without meditation. But when the two are combined together, again, it's extraordinary how effective they enhance each other and really multiply the effects that each one has. And as like I said, as you meditate and do practices more and more, your brain changes, you're able to start experience and feel more devotion. And as you practice devotion, your brain changes, your heart changes, and you're able to go deeper into meditation. And this is really, it's not even how devotion can improve your meditation, it's how meditation can improve your devotion, and how they both work together to ultimately bring us to divine freedom. People sometimes say, well, I'm not a devotional person, and I'm not by nature devotional. And in fact, everybody, to the very core of their being, by their very nature, is devotional. We were created by God with that love in our hearts, that yearning in our hearts for divine freedom. We were made with that. It's part of us. And really all that happens is it's just, essentially, I think for most people, it's beaten out of us or trained out of us from birth. I've told this story that I think some of you have heard, where I'll tell a very shortened version of it. But I was on a plane coming back from teaching meditation, and it was in Michigan where I was doing a program. And it's really traveling. I have to say, I was just talking to someone before. Traveling just absolutely is brutal for me for some reason. It's not on many levels. I just can't stand it. And here I am traveling all the time to do things. And one of the things that was affecting me for a time was that I'd be at these very inspiring events, and devotional and chanting and deep meditation and Kriya and all these things. And then I'd get on a plane and I couldn't see a lover of God anywhere, and just worldly people talking about, oh, we're going to Las Vegas to get drunk. And I've been on planes where people were already drinking and drunk, and just it was affecting me. And so on this plane trip, I said, okay, Divine Mother, where are your lovers out there? And I have to admit, I'm spoiled. I live at Ananda Village, and all of you, I know, you live in the world, essentially. And so I have to admit, I'm a wimp spiritually when it comes to my complaining about this, but that's what I was doing. And I said, where are the people who love you out here? And I was sad. I said, please show me somebody. And so I got on this plane, and as soon as I got on, there was a baby started crying. And it was a very, very newborn baby, just days old, it sounded like. And it never stopped crying. And I was listening and tuning into this crying, and I thought, it doesn't even know what it wants. I mean, it hasn't been here long enough to know that it's hungry or uncomfortable or anything. And why is it crying? And I was struck by the crying, which is that it's crying for its divine home. It was thrown out of its divine home, thrown into this body. It has a memory of being on the astral plane where it's free and relatively freer. And it was just crying because it was crying for its divine mother, for its divine home. And you could sense that in the way that it was crying. And the relatives and family were trying to calm it down and distract it. And I wanted to go back there and sit next to that baby and start whispering in his ear, don't stop crying. Don't ever forget. They're going to try to make you forget. They're going to distract you. They're going to feed you. They're going to make faces at you. As you get older, they're going to get friends and careers and toys and all of these other distractions. And essentially it's trained out of us, this love for God. But it is central to what we are. It's part of us. And so it's not, don't ever think, well, I'm not a devotional person, I don't have devotion. It really is, Sri Yukteswar called it the natural love of the heart that everyone is born with. In that book, The Holy Science, essentially he ends, after all this, you can skip the whole book if you want to skip to the very ending to find what is really the whole point of that book, which is that I hope I have proven that God is love. And that's what we are too. And so nobody is not devotional. All you have to do is try to tune into it, awaken it, discover it, find it. And there's many ways that you can do this. One, like I said, our physician who, after years of Kriya Yoga, found himself, just his brain changing. And what it does is it actually changes the frontal lobes and expands and makes them more alive, which is where compassion and love are centered there. And it actually changes us physically in that way. But also you'll find, one time someone asked Yogananda, how can I become more devotional? Because they didn't have devotion. And his answer was really simple. He just said, spend time with devotional people. There's nothing simpler than that. Come here. We have devotional people here. We have devotional chanting. Just come and start spending time and being open to it. And it's not that it changes you. Really all it does is start sort of rubbing away the dirt that's covering that gold of devotion and love that's really at the heart of each and every one of us. There are many, many other ways. One of the most effective ways is just to start talking to God all the time, under all circumstances. This just means it's simple. You can make a habit. It's amazing how often we get caught in a rut or a cycle where we react the same way to certain circumstances. That's called having your buttons pushed. And there are certain buttons that when they get pushed, you react a certain way. And all that really is just a habit. You just respond to a certain situation the same way every time, with irritation, with upset, with anger, with whatever, with desire or attachment. And you can retrain yourself. And it's really, I've seen this amazingly effective over the years. Start to retrain yourself so that when you react to any condition or circumstance, react by going to God. And I have found this amazingly effective with physical pain. Whenever you experience physical pain, go right to God. And just chronic pain, take it to God. Whenever it comes during the day, whenever it comes in your life, and this can be physical pain, it can be suffering, emotional or mental, just make the habit. Okay, this is my cue. This is my reminder that if I just get playthings or more success or more friends, that's just going to distract me. And this is just a reminder that I'm not free. The reason I'm feeling pain and the reason it's pulling me down is because I'm not free in God. That's the only reason. The pain itself isn't the cause. It's my lack of freedom in God that's the cause. And so just use that as a reminder to start talking to God. And just whatever way you can, if it's yelling and getting in Divine Mother's face and saying, what's the deal here? I didn't ask for this. You created this delusion, just like Yogananda was saying. Other circumstances. Work with all conditions and use them as a reminder to turn to God. failure is another one, spiritual failure. People develop the habit of when they fail spiritually, and by that I mean just in the more traditional sort of fundamentalist kind of a sense of when you slip and stumble and give in to this bad habit that you have, or maybe your discipline isn't very good and your sadhana and meditation practices haven't been very good. Rather than using that as an excuse to sort of hide in shame from God and say, well, God doesn't want to see me now, turn it the other way. Make the habit going right back in God's face. Go back to Yogananda. Say, you're not getting rid of me this easy. I'm here again. I'm going to keep trying again. In the Bhagavad Gita, one of the most beautiful passages in the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna basically says all these things that one can do to go back into union with God. And he says, meditation and yoga, that's the way to merge back into God. And he says, but if you can't do that, then you can serve God and you can practice karma yoga. And he says, but if you can't do that, and it just keeps going on and on, if you can't do that, there's always this. And finally he said, and even if your weak heart fails you, and this is Krishna, the Lord, speaking, even if your weak heart fails you, bring me your failure. And Master said God likes it, Divine Mother likes it, when we bring our failure and our shortcomings and our faults and say again, you're not going to get rid of me that easy. And you'll find, again, keep changing your habit of your way of reacting and your daily habits. Another one that is just, I can't say enough about how helpful it is. When you fall asleep at night, just go right to God, and just as you're falling asleep, you'll find that sleep becomes much, much more beautiful and just peaceful, and just your dreams become better. If as you fall asleep, you just give everything to God, to Divine Mother, and say, I'm yours, take me back into your arms, I love you. And if you just make that habit, you'll find is that when you wake up in the middle of the night, it's the thought you wake up with. The last thing you thought as you were falling asleep, you'll find when you wake up, oh, I love you, Lord. And when you wake up in the morning, it's your first thought. And you'll find that you can really change your habitual ways of responding to life, of reacting to events, of all the different kinds of situations. There's no situation that you can't do this with. And I mean none. Even when you're in the middle of making a mistake and making that same stupid mistake that you've made a million times, whether it's an addiction or just a fault, in the midst of it, again, rather than turning your back and trying to sort of hide it from God, say, Lord, here we are in this mess again. Remember, you made me, and you made this delusion, and it's not fair. Get me out. I want you to take me out. Take me to freedom. And you'll find that as you do this more and more, when you sit down to meditate, meditation becomes so much easier because you're already in a deep devotional communion with God, your dearest friend who you've been talking to as you fall asleep, as you wake up, as you stumble, as you make mistakes all the time. You'll find that your meditation is really, really enhanced and made very, very much deeper instantly because you sit down, you pray to God, and God is not far away. Not because God has pulled away from those who ignore him or her throughout the day, but because we pull away and we don't get very far away. And so we're always very, very close. And there's a really silly joke that I've heard Swami Kriyananda tell that actually in a way applies to this, where the Israeli Prime Minister is visiting the White House and he sees the red hotline to Russia that's known to be in the White House so that they can avoid nuclear catastrophes and stuff and get hold of each other instantly. And he knows what that is. But then he sees a white phone next to it. And he asks the president, well, what's that white phone? And the president says, well, that's a direct line to God. And the Israeli Prime Minister says, well, can I make a call? And he says, well, yeah, it's expensive though, you know. And so he makes the call and he's willing to pay the charge. It's a high charge, high fee, because you talk to God. And so several months later, the American president's visiting Israel and talking to the prime minister, and He's in his office. He says, "Oh, do you have a white phone too? What's that?" And he says, "Oh, that's a direct line to God also." And the president asks, "Can I make a phone call?" And he finishes making the call to try to get some advice. And he asks the Israeli prime minister, "Well, how much was it?" He says, "Oh, it's 10 cents. It's a local call here." But the point is that if you never pull away too far from God, and by doing all these things that I've been talking about, that when you sit down to meditate, it's a local call. God is not, you haven't pulled far away from God. You haven't run away. And you know, how often in our meditation do we spend seemingly the whole meditation just trying to get back to sort of a 0 point of our minds being totally out there and our emotions being totally out there, and just trying to get a point of semi-resemblance of calmness. When instead, if we sit down and we already have had that connection going all day, God is right there, very close. And when we start to meditate, it's much easier to go very deep, very quickly, and to have that devotion, which again, it's not foreign, it's completely natural to us. It's part of who we are. And so don't ever believe that you don't have devotion or that you're not devotional, because we were made with that. We were made with the yearning for God. We were made with the love for God. We were made with that crying, that baby crying for divine freedom. And all we have to do is try to tune into that, re-realize it, reawaken it, and recognize it. And there are many ways, like I've said, that you can do that. And so everybody can bring devotion into meditation and really into their daily life and make it just a constant practice in their lives. And start out, Swami Kriyananda has said recently, start out by just trying to think of God 5 minutes a day, very simply, or even 1 minute a day, consciously, if you're not thinking of it at all, God at all during the day. And over time you'll find that it starts to develop its own momentum, its own power, and becomes more and more natural and more easy over time. I just want to end by talking a little bit about something that Yogananda said. And he said it in such a beautiful and poignant way, I can't do justice to it one time, where he said that this relationship with God is the ultimate eternal divine romance, and that it's just the ultimate epic drama. He said it's just, and he was comparing it to like other sort of romantic dramas, and I imagine he could be thinking about the great epic movie of, romance and partying and all this, and it's a few years in two people's lives, and all of a sudden it's like epic, which is, how overused those words are in this day and age. And he said this divine romance is eternal, and it's many, many lifetimes. And he said, the way he put it was so sweet. He said that God, Divine Mother, has everything in the universe. It is everything in the universe. But there's only one thing that it doesn't have in the whole universe. There's only one thing it's lacking. There's only one thing that it wants, because it's fulfilled in every other way. And that is that it doesn't have our love. God doesn't have our love and our attention and our yearning, because we've gotten so distracted in this incredible world and attachments and emotions and all these things. And he said this is really the eternal romance, is because God and Divine Mother are very unhappy knowing that we don't love. And they want that more than anything that we could possibly imagine. And so they test our love to see that it's for real, to see that it's serious. And this romance is almost like, you can almost imagine Divine Mother picking the petals on the daisy. He loves me not, he loves me, she loves me not. Because that's really, and it's a long, long time. It's many, many lifetimes. And so Yogananda just said, keep working at it. Keep trying to move forward with it, with your practices, with your devotion, with reading devotional stories, being with devotional people, and just continually, under all circumstances, going back to God. And you will find that grace has the power to enter yourself to enter your life, to enter your heart, to change your heart, to change you at the very core of your being, and also just have fun and joy with it. There's another beautiful story of the Indian saint Ram Prasad that Swami Kriyananda has told many times recently. And Ram Prasad was building a fence in his yard or garden, and he called his daughter over to help him to string the string through the pieces of the fence to hold it up, because he needed someone on the other side to help him. And he was singing to Divine Mother, as he was wont to do. And the daughter asked, "Well, who are you singing to, Father?" And he says, "Oh, I'm singing to my Divine Mother." And she said, "Well, why do you sing to her? Why do you always sing to her?" And he said, "Well, because she never comes, and I want her to come, and this is the way I can get her to come." And she just laughed, and she says, "Well, why do you always sing to her if she never comes?" And then she laughed, and then she ran away. And then that night, Ram Prasad went to his home and told his wife about how their daughter was helping him put up the fence, and made these comments. And the wife said, "Well, that's impossible, because our daughter was in this other village, miles and miles away, from early morning and the entire day, and she could not have possibly come back and been with you at that moment." And then he realized it was God as Divine Mother teasing him, playing with him. And this is the divine romance. Have fun with it. Love God with joy. Take your sorrows, take your pains, take everything. And you'll find that when you combine it with the science of meditation, like I said, you won't recognize yourself. You won't recognize others who have been doing these things, because this power of self-effort and these scientific principles combined with the grace of God are really extraordinary. And we've seen it over the years at Ananda, all these years. And again, this is why I recommend visiting Ananda, just to see, because I try to tell people about it. I know many of you, in fact, perhaps most of you have been to Ananda Village, but you almost can't describe it because it sounds like it's impossible. It just can't be true. You describe how the people and the beauty of the place and harmony and love for God more than anything. But when you see it with your own eyes, you realize that you look around and you see this person. It's not like it's all one cookie cutter person who ended up there. There's people who are carpenters, and there's scientists, and there's school teachers, and there's parents, and there's musicians, and there's just very humble people who just do manual work, and they're all inspiring to me. I just am in awe. Some of the simplest people at Ananda who have never given a public talk, never done anything, and I know what their lives have been like, what they've had to go through. They all have karma. There's a saying that, why do bad things happen to good people? Well, bad things happen to everybody, whether you're good or bad, and that's just the way it is. But you'll find that people can transcend their suffering, their limitations, through these practices. And it's just honestly awe-inspiring. There's one man who works around the community who has Parkinson's disease, and sometimes he's stumbling around, and it looks like he's drunk, the way he stumbles around, just because he can't control his limbs. And I just am inspired every time. His gait now inspires me, just because it reminds me that he has this incredible joy, selfless service, incredible attitude, and again, a seemingly impossible circumstance and karma and suffering to overcome. But through the grace of God, through devotion, through meditation practices, anything is possible. And anything is possible for every single person in this room through these things. So, if you aren't meditating, take a meditation class here. If you are, do more. Do with more devotion. Practice all these things that I've been talking about, and you'll see changes, I guarantee it. So, do we have any questions? I can answer some questions if people have any.
Is the Ananda village self-sustaining, or have they realized their independence?
We have gardens, we have dairies, we have cows and goats. It's not 100% self-sustaining. It would have a long ways to go. And I think if we had early on focused on just that, We probably could have become a lot closer to self-sustaining, but so much of our energy has gone to doing things like this, starting centers everywhere and sending our very best people, rather than making us become self-sustaining, sending them out here to teach yoga and meditation. So, but spiritually it's very self-sustaining, but sustained by God, and just miraculously so. But we're always pushing it in that direction. There's a huge solar panel installations happening right now, just to be ready and prepared, and just to be going in that direction more and more. Yeah, we also have to be practical, because the spiritual path, yeah, you have to be practical too. It's not an excuse for just spacing out and hoping that God kind of covers our rear end and we don't have to do anything. So, any other questions?
Devarshi, what's your experience with, Master said, when you practice Kriya, practice it until breath becomes mind. I was wondering what you feel that means from your experience.
I know what he said that means, and what Swami Kriyananda has said. Yogananda said, practice Kriya so deeply until breath becomes mind, because it does work with the physical breath and the astral breath. But eventually it takes you so deep into yourself that the breathing stops and the mind stops. But for me, what it also can mean in an earlier stage is that it stops becoming a breathing practice and you forget about the breath. And when you're bringing energy up the spine, it's just purely a devotional act and devotional practice, and it's a blissful, joyful devotional practice, and not hard work or not a technique, or it goes way, way beyond any more being a technique. And I think that's kind of the process and the direction, and with all meditation practices and techniques.
What is the population of the village?
It's about 250 people, I would guess. I can never keep track. There's changes here and there. And families, single people, monasteries. There's just every possibility there. Other questions? Nope. Okay. Well, good luck with your meditation practice, with your devotion, and with your search for God. May it find final success in this lifetime.